Thank you, and welcome to the night studio here at the museum. We have an interview with the estimable Neil Leifer, the Mozart of sports photography, the all-time champion, and we are extremely pleased that Nikon has been our partner in this, the great photography and camera company. And Neil is going to tell us about his legendary career, which spans several decades and has included over 170 Sports Illustrated covers, actually altogether with Time and People covers, 200 in the most prestigious magazines of the Time Inc. world. Neil has also done a variety of books. As you know, several of those outside will be available for signing afterwards. He'll sign those, and then he'll decide who actually deserves to get one. It's one of the interesting little quirks you can have. I have known Neil for a number of years. My name is Shelby Coffey, and I'm a trustee here at the museum. But in the day, I was in the newspaper and magazine business, and he always had the most glorious reputation. Only in recent years have I been able to go to sports events and New York sports restaurants with him, and it's sort of like walking around backstage with Bono at a concert. John McEnroe comes over to Neil's table to pay respects.
I set that up.
Yeah, it worked. I fell for it hard and fast. So what I thought we'd do today was talk a little bit about that legendary career and some of the superlatives, because Neil always puts you in mind of the Guinness Book of World Records. What was the most astonishing photograph? What was the hardest one to get? And then we'll run through. We have a set which Neil can talk about a little bit, and then we'll go to your questions. And I think we'll have, in all, a very good session here. So Neil, the first thing I've got to ask you is to tell the wonderful story which you told last night about how you got into this amazing business as a young teenager growing up and having to talk your dad into something besides you being what did he want you to be, a good dentist or?
I think Dr. Leifer or a lawyer.
Doctor, lawyer. That would be good.
So engineer might have done okay, but that was about it.
Yeah. So how did the photography bug bite you, and tell us that story?
It really was nothing but a hobby that one day I woke up and discovered that people actually would pay me to, I was a sports fan, and I enjoyed taking pictures. I belonged to a camera club at a place called the Henry Street Settlement in Manhattan, which was supposed to keep big, tough guys like me off the street from gang warfare and things like that. How I snuck into the group, I've never quite figured out, but we had a wonderful teacher there. There's a woman who ran the camera club, and she really just made photography fun. So I liked taking pictures. I was a terrible darkroom technician, but I enjoyed trying. I just never got very good at it. I think it takes patience, which is one of the things I don't have. One of the nice things about sports photography is it's immediate. So I love taking pictures. I was a terrific sports fan, and then I discovered one day people actually would pay me to do something I like doing and put me in the best seat in the house, which I could never have afforded. I grew up in a low-income housing project on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, so it was a perfect marriage.
So tell us about the first camera.
Well, like everybody, I started out with, today you'd call it the point and shoot. I started out with a Brownie Hawkeye and graduated to something, maybe I think on my bar mitzvah, I got a 35 millimeter camera. And then I bought what I called a poor man's Rolleiflex. It was a $75 camera called the Ashikamat, which I took some of the earliest pictures, which we're going to look at with. And I was 15 years old when I discovered, I wanted to photograph the New York football Giants, and I discovered a way to get in, because I just couldn't afford a ticket. I could barely afford a couple of rolls of film. A ticket was beyond, certainly out of my price range. But I found out that every Sunday there would, an Army Veterans Hospital, this is 1958, and so they were either Korean War vets or some World War II vets, and they would pull up every Sunday 2 or 3 bus loads of Army wounded veterans from this Veterans Hospital in wheelchairs. And for the 50, 60 wheelchairs, they had 6 or 7 people to wheel them in. I remember facilities where you didn't have to be handicap friendly in those days. There was no way you really could bring a wheelchair into most sports stadiums. The Yankee Stadium, they would bring the wheelchairs down what was the visiting bullpen ramp where trucks would go in with things needed at the stadium. And then they would line the wheelchairs up along the wall out where the monuments were at Yankee Stadium. And there would be anywhere from, as I said, 50 to 60. They had 6 or 7 people to wheel them in, and I volunteered every week. And unlike most it turns out being on the sideline or being in the end zone is perhaps the worst seat in the stadium to see the game from. So others, I wasn't the only person who caught on to this, can I help you with a wheelchair? But the minute the others got in, they would disappear because now you're in the stadium and you never saw them again. I would stay because I was right there on the sideline. You were just behind one of the end zones. And I was there to help them wheel the wheelchairs out. So the result was I got in every week, including what became,
Shall we go to the first
one.
picture?
I'll tell you the first one. As it got colder, I went to every game that season, and as it got colder on the sidelines, we'll get to the first picture, but I'll tell you about it. As it got colder, we had coffee. We had big coffee urns for the Army veterans. That first picture is the one.
There it is.
And you can just see in the left side of that frame, you can see part of there were 2 security, 2 cops, we used to call them rent-a-cops, on the sidelines.
Still do.
And it got very cold, and of course, being the nice guy that I am, I felt that these police would really, or cops would want a cup of coffee. And I would go down with a cup of coffee and usually walk behind the giant bench or the visiting bench, bring the cop a cup of coffee, and of course, while he was drinking his coffee, he looked the other way when I took my yashika mat out from under my jacket, and I would get, this is my best image, but I got some chance to photograph some of the sideline bench photographs before the New York press photographers would spot me and throw me out. And I'd go back to where I was. Now, on my 16th birthday, the New York Giants, my team, who I was certainly rooting for, got into the championship game with the Baltimore Colts. And,
Shall we go to the next picture?
I think you should. And I'm going to talk later on about luck. I have never met a good photographer that was modest, so I'm certainly not going to plead modesty about this. But luck is 60, 70, maybe 75% of good sports photography. You have to get lucky. For example, I could never have gotten to the other end zone if the Colts didn't happen to be coming my way, or if the pass that Johnny Unitas threw on the play before this one had been caught for a touchdown in the left corner of the end zone where it went. There's no picture, but instead, the Colts ended up on the 1-yard line in sudden death, the first sudden death in the history of football. The game has been referred to now as called the greatest game ever played, and Johnny Unitas scored the winning touchdown right in front of me. So first I got lucky because it happened at my end of the field. Then I got lucky because he came right at me. But of all the luck I had, what I dreamed of in these days was being able to afford a professional camera with a medium telephoto lens where I would have done just what the pros did and filled the frame with Johnny Unitas and Alan Amici going over for the touchdown. But I didn't have that. I had this poor man's Rolleiflex, which had a wide lens on it, a normal lens we call it, and therefore it took in the whole scene, including the mood, the lights of Yankee Stadium, the giant line looking on with frustration. And even as a Giant fan, I liked this picture the first time I saw it. I didn't like the result of the game, and today it's probably one of my best pictures. Lest I sound like I'm making too much of luck, I want to point out that the one thing when you look at any photography, certainly at sports photography, the difference between a good photographer and the very best photographers are when a good photographer gets lucky, he doesn't miss. And I didn't miss.
Weather plays a big part in a number of your pictures. Tell us about Broadway Joe here.
Well, this is Broadway Joe, by the way. I'm sure setting up his evening date. I think there were a couple of minutes left in the game, and I looked over, and there was Joe on his telephone. But you know, nobody wants to work in foul weather. There is nothing nicer than a warm day and the sun over your shoulder, like Eastman Kodak used to say it should be. Particularly in those days, films were slow, and it was difficult to shoot in dark light. You really wanted to shoot action. On the other hand, when the weather gets, whether it's fog or mud or rain or cold, or once you warm up and dry off the cameras and the lenses and you look back years later, it always makes the best pictures. And this picture of Joe is one of my very, very favorite and one of my best known. The next picture this is Sam Huff, and for those of you that live here in Washington, I guess he's been for many years the broadcaster for the Redskins. Of course, I was a Giant fan, and he was our star linebacker, and I love this picture. And again, it just shows you've got to imagine what I was fighting. I mean, you're cleaning the lens off because it keeps getting wet. You're trying to keep the camera dry so you could reload. I mean, loading, or, you know, in these days, by the way, they had something called film. You put it in the camera. Well, you know, at a football game, it's not unusual for a photographer to shoot 30 rolls of film a game. Well, I can't begin to tell you how difficult it was to load film in pouring rain, or, you know, or make sure you didn't drop it in the mud when you got it out of the camera. But the results were always spectacular, and this is one of my best.
Now, you've gone to so many events, covered so many people. We did want to take a bit of an Olympic set for you and have you talk a little bit about the Olympics before we get into your very most famous shots.
This is truly, you know, in the film business, and of course I'm not too sure now what the average budget would be, but a few years ago, a huge budget, Steven Spielberg or Marty Scorsese would get a $100 million film when they spent $100 million to make a film. This project, which I'll tell you about, was Time Magazine's version of a $100 million film. It was certainly the most expensive project I ever worked on. But we had an editor, we had a wonderful editor at Time Magazine named Ray Cave, and Ray, I think the best magazine editor of all time, and what he really enjoyed more than anything else, I mean, he was determined to put Newsweek out of business, and he enjoyed every Monday morning.
He was a little early, but
he came very close. He came very close in our day, and what Ray enjoyed doing was beating the daylights out of Newsweek. And every 4 years, the Olympics come up, and we know we're both, and particularly this was an American Olympics, was going to happen in Los Angeles in 1984, and we wanted to have a much better preview issue than Newsweek. But beyond that, Ray Cave had also grown up at Sports Illustrated, as I did, and both of us actually really wanted to show Sports Illustrated how to do an Olympic issue. Ray was, I think, more intent. He'd already had Newsweek's number. So I went to him with this idea of shooting 14 or 15 athletes around the world in front of what would be the picture postcard of their country. We had one exception, by the way. I did Fidel Castro with the great boxer Teofilo Stevenson, and I told Castro that he is to Cuba what the Great Wall is to China, what the Taj Mahal was to India, what the pyramids are to Egypt. And it's one of my favorite pictures. We ended the session, I got a picture, I've always posed with the subject. I think there's one of them in the show downstairs of Ali and I. But I ended the session with Castro, asking Castro if I could take a picture with him lighting my cigar. And it's one of my favorite. But this picture I took, obviously, of one of the gymnasts on the Great Wall of China. It was bitter cold, much colder than it is out there today. However, this was going to be the Summer Olympics, and the Chinese were the only athletes I couldn't talk out of their sweats. It still made a wonderful picture, but this is a young Chinese gymnast on the Great Wall. Okay. And the next one, this is, you go to Abercrombie & Fitch and you buy a couple of those fake Giraffe, or you blow them up, I think, and This was kind of fun. I wanted to do two Kenyan runners. These were two great Kenyan runners, and I wanted to do them in the bush. And I went to I did this in Kenya, and there's a man named Don Hunt who he sort of makes sure the animals are where you want them for movies, for big movie productions. And I met him, and we talked about this, and he said, well, what do you want? And I said, well, we knew we weren't going to get lion or elephant or a little harder. I said, I'd love to have some giraffe. They had them, was beautiful. These are reticulated giraffe, which are a rarer breed, and they're just beautiful, and they have quite a few of them there. And he took me out in a vehicle, and he said, so, and I'm a bit of a New York wise guy, I guess, occasionally. And he said, so, what do you want? I said, well, I'd like half a dozen giraffe. And he said, where do you want them? And I said, you're kidding. What do you mean, where do I want them? He said, well, pick the spot, because, I mean, I'm thinking of light and things. And we drove out and I found that acacia tree, which is off to the left. And I said, well, that looks like a pretty good background. And it was morning when we went out, right after sunrise. And I said, the light is perfect. He said, well, show me exactly where you want the giraffe. I said, you're kidding, exactly? Well, it turns out that what he did was for the next 4 days, and I forgot to tell Ray Cave what this was going to cost, but for the next 4 days, they put out something that sort of looked like bales of hay, but they're candy that the giraffe just absolutely love. And for 4 or 5 days, every morning at the time that I wanted them, half a dozen giraffe would show up, and they'd enjoy this candy, and they were there. And I started with longer lenses. What I didn't anticipate, it was this New York City Lower East Side guy, and I had an assistant from Bolivia. He'd certainly never seen a giraffe. The two Kenyans who grew up in the bush were terrified. They had never been this close to the animals. But anyway, I could be pretty persuasive, and we got closer and closer. I started off with long lenses. We actually had 4 giraffe. And then a Cape buffalo came by and scared 2 of them away, and that was the only time I ever saw a gun show up, but they were ready to take care of the Cape buffalo. In any case, I shot a lot. It got more and more, they got more and more comfortable with us, and the runners were able to get closer and closer. This is a wide-angle shot, and I probably shot 20, 25 rolls of film, and the one thing that happened, which you're not seeing here, of course, is I had my camera bag just off to my left. My assistant was loading cameras as fast as I could shoot. I had 2 of the same camera, and I would put one down, and he would load it, and again, you had to put film in the camera. And we would throw the film in the pocket that I had my exposed film. And at one point, and I love animals, I would never hurt an animal. This was the one exception. I turned around at one point, and an ostrich had gone around, a big sucker. I mean, this was
they can
an
kick.
ostrich had gone around, and as I looked, he is eating the film, the exposed film, from my camera bag, and I saw in his throat them literally, and I'd have killed this sucker in a second. And they chased him away. Everyone was watching the shoot, which is why they missed it. This is a great picture, and there are a couple of others that I really love, but to this day, I will always think that there were probably 1 or 2 pictures on the other roll that were even better, but we'll unfortunately never see them. We had to trail the ostrich for a couple of days, and we weren't ready to do that.
So then,
this
you made it
picture
to
is,
Greece.
we did Greece, and I shot Greece. It was, I would
That looks
scout.
a little staged, Neil.
Well, I wanted her to look like she was on a Greek urn. It was meant to be. They were all staged, by the way. You don't think they run with the giraffe every morning?
I'm a news guy, you know.
I had more trouble because half of them were just so afraid of everything I wanted to do. I put this huge guy who was a world champion discus thrower from Egypt, and I put him on this little spot in front of the Sphinx and the pyramids. And he just was shaking. He was terrified. He was claustrophobic at first when I had him below, and then when I put him up top, he was terrified he was going to fall down. This was done, obviously I didn't want anybody in the picture besides, she was a world champion javelin thrower from Greece. And it turned out that the only time the light was right in front of the Parthenon was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the problem was it's always full of tourists, and they don't close until 5. And again, it's a little bit of the same thing, bringing coffee to the cops on the sidelines. I think I gave out $50 to the guy that was in charge of entries at the Parthenon, and they closed at 3 that day.
Nice.
And that's how I got that picture.
Excellent. Now to the portraits, and this is probably for some of our visitors still a legendary figure. You've done a great number of portraits, and we're going to get to a couple of questions about what is sometimes called gossip, but which we in the Washington news business call character analysis. So tell us a little bit about Bear Bryant,
Well,
the demigod of Alabama.
I mean, for a New York, a Yankee going down to the heart of Alabama and photographing somebody who everybody in Alabama thought walked on water. I mean, as I discovered, he would have been elected governor by acclamation, I think, had he run or whatever he wanted to do. What was so nice about Coach Bryant is he is probably, I would say, along with Muhammad Ali, they're the 2 nicest people I've ever met in sport. Here's a guy who men were in fear of. He had a wife that was about 4'2", and his name was Paul Bear Bryant, and she still called him Paul. And I photographed him. The first thing I did, I asked him if I could photograph him at home with his wife, and he said, I won't try to do his accent, but he said, here at Alabama, I run the place. Anything I say yes to gets done. But you come in my home, he said, you got to talk to my wife. He got her on the phone, and I sort of asked her if I couldn't photograph her. I want to do the 2 of them having dinner and just do a family portrait, which she said yes to, and invited me to come and shoot, and I had dinner with them. And every time she looked at him and said, Paul, he jumped. I've never seen
Nice.
it. I think it would have ruined this entire image if we had recorded the session, but he was just a great guy, and I am very proud of this picture. I was never a portrait photographer. This is photograph won first prize that year in the most prestigious of the photos of the year, which you have here, I think, on display every year, and I'm just very proud of it. It was a Time magazine cover and one of my favorite.
Very good. Next portrait.
Well,
The great.
boxers, I mean, they're no better subjects. And George Foreman, by the way, I met Shelby because he's a bigger fight fan than I am. In fact, I invited Shelby to dinner tonight, and he said, what, and miss an HBO fight show here in Washington? That's not going to happen. And he's going to the fights. But George Foreman was just, and it's very interesting. I know Shelby's going to ask me about the most difficult subject I ever photographed, and the nicest and the best. And I will tell you that George Foreman is probably the only one that qualifies for both. He was a miserable young man, and I love boxers. They are the nicest athletes by far. I'm often asked why boxing was my favorite sport to photograph, and I say because they were the nicest athletes to be around. You won't find anybody like Joe Frazier, or certainly Muhammad, who was God's gift to every journalist, whether you were a writer or a television, just made a hero out of you, which is why every journalist loved Ali, even the ones that rooted against him. He just made you look good.
I wanted to ask you why you think that is. I got a theory from Jim Murray, who was the great sports columnist for the Los Angeles Times for many years. But do you have a theory?
I don't know. It's funny. I think the 2 sports where I photographed probably the least educated athletes, boxing and hockey. And I'm talking about years ago when they were all Canadians, and most of them, if they finished high school, that was something. They were just the nicest guys. They're gentlemen. I mean, certainly if you walked into a boxing locker room, the language was something like a Teamsters convention, or except bring a lady in, and the language immediately changed. They were gentlemen. They're the nicest athletes, and I'm generalizing. There certainly are an exception or 2. And young George Foreman was one of those exceptions. He was just the only athlete that ever tried to shake me down for money. And I mean, he had just won the heavyweight championship. He got paid $5 million to fight in Zaire and was now about to get paid more. And he shows up to pose for the cover of Sports Illustrated and demands money, which didn't happen. I called, he was in his gloves and trunks, and I called the editor in New York and said, the champ wants money. And I won't use his language, but he said, don't give him a subway token. George didn't find that very amusing, and he feigned leaving. And I basically said, well, that was a great session.
Yeah.
And anyway, he came back and posed. He turned in to be one of the nicest. He found God. I don't know quite what happened to George, but when George came back the second time after losing the title, there isn't a nicer athlete ever than George.
Jim Murray's theory, for what it's worth, was that boxers who were experienced always knew that no matter how tough they were, there was somebody tougher in the gym on a given day, and that invoked a decent sense of humility. However, of course, we pay them for the trash talk as well. So you don't necessarily hear a lot of that, but that your perspective is very interesting. So here's a different subject from the boxing world. What was your experience with Mike Tyson?
Well, believe it or not, Tyson is one of the nicest subjects you could have. I mean, he and you talk about gentlemen. Muhammad will flirt with any lady you bring up to him. Tyson will simply be the ultimate gentleman. He usually, will whisper to somebody, you know, how lucky he is to be with you. He's a great subject. How can you miss? I mean, and I'm not, certainly I'm aware of Tyson's other flaws.
After midnight, probably.
Well, I went out with Tyson one night. I went out, he took me out drinking
Drinking with Mike Tyson.
Wilds. Well, I needed him to pose, and I went out with him one night, and I think I was the only white man for 40 or 50 miles, and let's say Tyson was coming on to other people's women. And I remember thinking to myself, number one, when the first bullet hits him, he's no longer that tough.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them are packing, and I said, they're going to miss him for sure and get me. And I won't even be mentioned in the newspaper the next day.
We would have eulogized you, Neil. It would have been remarkable. We'll be having the Leifer retrospective here, and memories by Barbra Streisand from the way we were would be playing over all these pictures. It'd be great. Showbiz.
Anyway, this was a Time magazine cover, and a little bit of it, I'll tell you a bit about why I love the picture, because part of what you try to do is, planning is so important in this. This was meant to be a Time cover, and you have to think about, believe it or not, you can take the most beautiful picture for Time magazine, but if you've put something important, the subject's face certainly, in where the corner flap goes, where they bill next week's story, it doesn't run on the cover. If you haven't left room for that very fat logo that they have, well, this cover I had totally figured out. I not only left room for the logo and the corner flap, but I put the glove up there because I knew that's where the billing would go. Because the address label goes on the left side.
Smart.
And if you don't think of those things, you don't get what you want.
Yeah. Now, there's the commentator from the Steelers.
I guess he hadn't gotten his new contract then. And I love this picture. I gave it to my dentist on his 50th birthday, and he has a large poster-sized print of it, and all I wrote on the bottom of it was before. And he loves it. He tells me that the guys who come in all love it, and the women would like to sit in a different chair when they sit down.
Okay, and your greatest subject, 70 sessions.
Well,
here he is.
Nobody was better than Ali. I mean, and really, you didn't have to be working for an important magazine like Life or Sports Illustrated. You didn't have to be Howard Cosell. I might add, you still don't have to be. Muhammad never saw a camera or a microphone or a reporter with a notebook and a pen out that he didn't spend time with, and it wasn't just a little bit of time. If Ali promised you 20 minutes, an hour later he was still suggesting things. And he just made me look good, and of course, my editor thought, wow, this Leifer is really good. Well, you know, you couldn't miss because he really made it so easy to succeed.
Most famous man in the world. Now here, this was picked, as I recall, as the finest sports photograph of the last half century of the 20th century. What a story behind this. For those who are not boxing fans, what, you're having trouble seeing it? Picture not up?
Yeah.
Okay. This was the famous rematch between Muhammad Ali and Sonny Liston. Muhammad Ali had shocked the world by beating the odds at, I believe, 6-1 to beat Liston, who had quit on his stool, having hurt his elbow and shoulder. And Ali was expected possibly to lose the rematch, and suddenly a mystery punch, which was not quite a mystery, as the photographs later showed, knocked Liston down in the first round, and this,
thank God,
was the iconic photograph. So tell us how you got there, the other photographer from Sports Illustrated, and the interesting life of this picture, which was not really recognized at the start quite as what an amazing photo.
Getting there was that was my job. I mean, I was pretty established at Sports Illustrated, and I covered all the big fights in those days. And the guy between Ali's legs, the bald photographer, is Herb Scharfman, who was a great fight photographer. There's a very famous picture, they call it the rubber face of Marciano and Walcott, which he had taken. It probably, better than anything I could ever tell you, illustrates what I meant about luck in sports photography. You had to be in the right seat, because I don't care how good Herb Scharfman was that night. He's looking up at Ali's rear end. You're not going to get much of a picture. And he knew it. As I said, what I'm proudest of is I didn't miss. And by the way, this is one frame. These were done with strobe lights, so this was not sequence. It's one picture, and as I said, what separates, I think, the really good photographer from the very good one is not missing, and obviously I didn't miss. One of the things that happened to me with this picture that I like to tell the story, because I know he's a friend of Shelby's. For years, Larry Merchant, who does fairly well financially and I think can afford to buy a print, was bugging me for a print of this picture because he insisted that he was in it. Well, you know, I'm not that easy to con, and I'm saying, come on, Larry. I never believed it. Well, it turns out that the guy just to Herb Scharfman's right, as we're looking at it, there's one other face between Ali's legs, is young Larry Merchant.
Oh.
He got his print.
Oh, my. Got to find some more of those. And this, a classic, another Ali picture. Tell us about it.
Well, this is my very favorite because this is, as I said, I mean, look, luck is important, and certainly I had to get the right knockdown. One of the nice things about this will never happen again because boxing doesn't look like this anymore. The ring apron looks like it looks like the Berlin Wall with a graffiti on it here. You know, I mean, in the middle of the ring is the logo for whatever beer company is sponsoring the fight, and on one side, it'll have the Hotel MGM Grand logo, and then it'll have HBO Sports Present and Don King or Top Rank, Bob Arum's company. The fighters dress like wrestlers today. I mean, and they have ads on also on their trunks.
Yes, they do.
It just doesn't look like this. This was when boxing still had the old tradition. The champ wore white trunks. The challenger wore black most of the time. Ali showed up, much to annoyed Sonny Liston, I think. For his first fight, Ali chose to wear white trunks. Maybe he knew. But the champ would wear white, the challenger wore black, the ring, everything was symmetrical. The press rows around the ring. And this picture came from my head. This could never have been done before this fight, ever. This was a fight at the Houston Astrodome, which was then called the eighth wonder of the world, 1966. Mm-hmm. And it was possible to do this picture because instead of the ring lights, the lights like what you see here, this is the way a boxing ring is lit, with a rig over the ring, just as these lights are lighting Shelby and I. This is where the ring lights go, and they're normally 20 to 25 feet over the ring. Well, no lens no wide-angle lens would have given you this perspective. A fisheye got this, but then you got a ring that looked like a basketball rather than the symmetry and the square ring. The Houston Astrodome, on the other hand, had a lighting rig that was the size of the room, actually bigger. I believe it was 80 feet across, and it was maybe 50, 60 feet across, sorry. And it was like an elevator. It came up and down from the ceiling, from 208 feet up. But it was so big that if you put it 20 feet over the ring, it covered half the seats from the upper deck, which were selling for $25 a seat, and there were 25 or 30,000 of them. Well, you don't want to do that. So they would, because by the way, they were not set just for a boxing match. They would light a rock and roll concert, a political convention, whatever you had in the Astrodome. So the lights were going to be up 80 feet. And when I heard that, I said, maybe this is the place you can do this kind of picture. It had never been done, and I did it, and the picture worked out. And one of my proudest moments ever, got more enjoyment out of this than you can imagine, was after this picture was published for the first time. At the next fight at the Astrodome, there was no photographer thought to put the camera in the middle because you're looking at it down on people's heads. You used to put them in the corner of the ring so maybe you'd get a face. The next fight, there were 5 photographers trying to get there first so they could get that very middle spot for that camera.
So we've got to have one Washington shot, and then we're going to questions. Tell us a little bit about JFK and LBJ.
Well, this is 1961, the opening baseball game. It was tradition for the president to go to Griffith Stadium and throw out the opening pitch, and I asked SI if I could do that. I'd never seen a president before. I was really excited about this. And on the other hand, I was a baseball fan. I didn't realize that in order to do this, I'd have to sit with my back to the game. It's the only time I ever sat with my back to the game the whole time. But Sports Illustrated was able to get a position in the White House pool, and they sat about 8 of us out in our little camera cases, about 25 feet or 20 feet in front of the presidential box, and I sat there waiting to get my picture. Well, first I photographed Kennedy throwing out the opening pitch, and as much as he played a lot of football, touch football.
The back.
Well, let's say he had a lousy delivery. He did not make, there was this wonderful picture of Dwight Eisenhower throwing out the opening pitch. I still remember it. I knew when I watched Kennedy throw, and he threw out 2 or 3 pitches, there was no picture there. And you couldn't see it on the back of the camera, which is so obvious that his delivery wasn't it just didn't make a good picture. But I assumed that he'd eat a hot dog, maybe get a little mustard on his lip or something good would happen. Well, he was a complete bore to photograph for 8 innings, 7 or 8 innings. He just didn't do anything. Lyndon Johnson ate a couple of hot dogs, he had a beer. It was pretty good. The vice president was looking very good. But I knew I didn't have any pictures of John Kennedy that were any good or anything special. And then 2 things happened. It got cold, and he put a hat on. And I gave a print of this years later to Caroline Kennedy, who told me that it was the first, other than the top hat he wore, I think, at the inauguration.
Very rare.
It was the first picture she had ever seen of her dad with a hat. But that didn't make enough for the picture. And then finally, a foul ball went in the direction of the presidential box, and everybody leaned, as I like to say, this is the Kennedy administration leaning to the left. And that was the best picture, and that's it.
That's great. I want to do a short lightning round of Guinness Book of World Records superlatives for you, and then we're going to go to the audience. And the one background that you also need to know is that Neil is not just a great still photographer. He has also done documentaries. He's had 2 on HBO. One was nominated, one of his documentaries.
On the short list, not nominated.
On the short list for the Academy Award. He's done feature films. So let's get to the character analysis part of, you've seen all of these great athletes. Just tell us, and quick, short reason, who are the biggest jerks you've ever had to photograph? Besides young George Foreman, who became good old George Foreman.
I hadn't thought about this until just now, but maybe it's the name, but 2 Larrys.
Aha, 2 Larrys.
Larry Holmes, one of the few boxers that I really, really didn't like, and just, I think he had a huge chip on his shoulder because
Because
he
he
never
wasn't
got the
Muhammad Ali.
recognition.
Yeah.
And Larry Bird, believe it or not.
Oh-ho, the Bird.
And Larry Bird was one of, you don't often find yourself in a position where you can just look at the subject and say, well, thank you, take a hike if you'd like. I got assigned to do a cover. I know you wanted a quick answer, but this is a good story, I'll tell it to you.
Okay.
Got assigned to do a cover, and I say the picture is in the show here for Newsweek that was going to preview the Barcelona Olympics, the Dream Team. And Newsweek wanted Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, and Larry Bird. I had photographed Magic Johnson before, and Magic is not only is one of the smartest athletes I ever met, but he's just another one of the really, really good guys and easy to work with. And Magic liked the pictures I took, and we hit it off. So I knew once I had Magic in cooperating, that I'd get whatever I want. And Magic sort of helped me get Michael Jordan because Michael, he would much prefer to have been on the golf course than posing for a Newsweek cover. But that was all set. And then it came time for Larry Bird, and Larry just had no interest in this at all. And I remember I approached him in the hotel lobby and told him, now you are going to be there. And he said, well, if I feel like it, I'll be there, or something like that. So I called Newsweek. I wanted to know how hard to press Larry, and I had to see him once more. Frank DeFord was writing the piece, and Frank and I were going to go to see Larry. And I called Newsweek, and I said, I'm really concerned about Larry Bird. He's not totally with us, and I can't promise he's going to show up. And the editor of Newsweek said, you got Michael Jordan? He didn't even mention Magic. He said, we don't care if Larry Bird shows up. So armed with that, I went up to see Larry Bird, and he gave me another answer that was very iffy. And I said, well, Larry, here's the situation. We're going to shoot this at 2 o'clock. You don't want to come? Don't come. I don't care, and Newsweek doesn't care. If you come, you'll be on the cover of Newsweek next week. I said something like that. I was a bit more tactful.
Good negotiating stance.
And Larry showed up and actually behaved himself. So. But I've not forgiven Larry, obviously.
Okay. You have also seen the world's top athletes in great events. Name a couple of actual shock and awe performances that left you shocked and awed. What have been the greatest athletic performances that you have seen? Top of the head.
Well, the two would be Secretariat, all three races. I mean,
Yeah.
Now I can't watch the clock. I mean, I didn't, but obviously,
That 20-length lead probably gave you a clue.
Was, yeah, and that. I argue at the end of the century, everyone was doing their greatest athletes of the century.
Mm-hmm.
And I got shot down with this argument, but I still believe that it's a valid one. Eric Heiden.
Yeah.
Eric Heiden, there's a different body, physical, muscle requirements for running sprints and running marathons. You train differently, you build yourself up differently. Well, in the 1980 Olympics, there were 5 skating events, and they go from a sprint to what would be the marathon. I think it's from 400 meters to 10,000 meters, something like that. And there were only 5 races. None were relays. Eric Heiden raced in all 5. He won all 5. He won 5 gold medals. I think he set 4 world records. Nobody else has ever tried that. And don't misunderstand, there are a lot of, we don't have, skating is not big in this country, but it's huge in the Scandinavian countries, and certainly in the Eastern European bloc it was huge, in Russia. This guy, I think, probably that's the single greatest performance I've ever seen. And just to put one third one, I certainly think Muhammad's performance, and I mean, he demolished Sonny Liston the first time, and that would be right up there.
Yeah, was indeed. Okay, Q&A. Raise a hand. Here we go, right here. Give the young man. Let's see. Rumble, young man, rumble.
How old are you?
Old enough
Well,
to know better and young enough not to care.
Let's start by saying I've got 2 grandkids older than you. That should do it, right? But I'm going to be 69 in 2 weeks.
Right. And to call them out, Neil's son and daughter and brother are here. Okay, go right ahead, right up there. Thanks very much.
You described yourself as a fantastic sports fan, so were there ever instances where Neil, the emotional fan with your favorite teams or athletes, ever influenced the work of Neil, the professional photographer, at all?
I got to tell you, if I had planted a question, I did not, I don't know you, so, but if I couldn't have planted a better one. Not only did it happen, but it's a lesson I learned that I'll never forget. When Ali fought Joe Frazier the first time, was one of the great fights. Madison in 1971, two undefeated champions. And Joe, by the way, was one of my very, very favorite. We talk about nice people. They don't come nicer than Joe. I mean, I love Joe Frazier, but I was an Ali fan. And more important than that, there was no question that Ali, I mean, I think Ali's the greatest athlete I ever saw. So I knew Ali was going to win the fight. Now, you only have 36 frames in the camera. When you're ringside, and the magazine isn't going to be looking for pictures. If Joe Frazier gets knocked out in the 10th, 12th, whatever round, nobody's going to be looking for pictures of Joe Frazier hitting Ali. They're going to look for Ali hitting Joe Frazier. And of course, I knew that Muhammad Ali was going to win the fight. So I'm sitting with my camera, and yeah, I had someone loading, so you know I could have a fresh camera, but you don't want to be out of film when the knockout happens. Therefore, every time Joe Frazier would throw a punch, I would say, well, that wasn't too important. And every time Ali threw the most inane jab, click, 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 because those are the pictures that are going to matter. And I was in Joe's corner. I was sitting this far from Joe's seat, and I could hear his corner getting more and more confident, and I think I would turn to the photographer next to me every once in a while and say, how are you scoring the fight? And I think about the 10th or 11th round, somebody just said to me, Joe is killing him. And Joe's going to win this fight. And I realized I didn't have any pictures of Joe Frazier. Well, certainly nothing good. I had a whole lot of good pictures of Ali hitting Joe Frazier. I mean, he hit him plenty. All you had to do was see the pictures of Joe's face at the end of the fight. You knew that Frazier had been hit. But clearly what my editor was going to look like. Well, all of that stopped mattering anyway, because then I talked about luck. Joe Frazier knocked Ali down in the 15th round, and I don't care what you have for the first 14 rounds. When the knockout happens, that's all they're looking for. And I was in the seat Herbie Sharfman was in for my listing picture, and I knew it wasn't going to be me that day. But I learned a lesson, and I never again let my smarts, I was so smart, you know, that I made the wrong choice.
Great question. Yes, this gentleman right here, behind the young man.
Neil, is there one photo over the years that stands out as the photo that got away, that you were unlucky? Like, for example, the photo of Secretariat winning the Belmont by 31 lens, a photo that you look at today and say, I wish it was my photo.
Well, you picked one that I probably took. I would, and I'm not going to be this egotistical about too many of my shots, but I took the best picture of that race hands down. So it's one of my very, very favorite. I got very lucky. I have gotten credit that I don't deserve for that picture. It's a picture of Ron Turcotte looking straight at me, and people to this day, I've sat here and had people like Shelby introduce the picture and say, and look, Neil got him to look over at me. Well, I had no idea what he was looking at was the teletimer, which was on the tote board behind me to see what record time he was on. But that was one of my luckiest moments and one of my best moments. I can't begin to count the number of pictures that got away. Of course, all the time. I mean, you know, as I say, you're paid not to miss. But I missed plenty, and what do you do?
Okay, we got another question right up there at the top, reaching for the microphone.
Thank you. This is an art of the craft or craft of the art question. When you set up for these photographs, when you set up your camera, the old film cameras that you used, what was that process? And secondly, when you instinctively knew you had the moment, the sort of Cartier-Bresson decisive moment, or did you know you caught a really good picture, you framed it, and you saw it on the camera? So there's two questions. One, how did you set a camera up usually? Because this is variable situations. And secondly, did you have that instinctive sense, I think I got something here?
Both very good questions. Well, I'll take the second one first then. For starters, remember, this is not digital age. You didn't see it. You never had that kind of confidence. I knew I might have been in the right seat. I didn't know, I don't remember Turcotte looking over at me, but I knew that the knockdown with Ali happened exactly where I wanted it to happen. You know, I remember having a great day, the day of the Ice Bowl in Green Bay. For 59 minutes and 57 seconds, I was absolutely on. And then he squeezed in for the winning touchdown. I was in the wrong spot, and I knew I didn't have it. You don't know. And the other thing, and because it's a really important point, the two things that every photographer worried about in those days, unlike today where there's so much latitude in the digital system, and the autofocus has gotten better and better and better. I genuinely, sports photography is done primarily with long lenses. Even the picture of Kennedy here is a medium long lens. But with football, with baseball, with basketball, the subjects are moving. I worried about my focus, and I worried about my exposure because there was so little latitude. You really had to be crack on or pretty close to crack on, or the pictures weren't going to look good on the printed page. So I was never that confident about that. You thought you had it. You knew it played out the way you'd want it to, but I worried about it. I'm sorry, the second question was
How did you set it?
well, I mean, that's remember the event is taking place on Saturday night. The big fight is Saturday night. We would get there as early as Tuesday or Wednesday. I mean, the strobe lights, you'd spend 2 or 3 days working with the electrician, fighting to get the amount of amperage you needed because television was using it all, or more often because you didn't bribe them enough. And then doing tests. I mean, for example, the overhead picture of Ali Williams, they lowered and raised that thing probably 20 times starting on Tuesday or Wednesday, and once it was set up, I actually shot a roll of color film, had it developed, processed in Houston to see that the framing, so I knew what the frame looked like. You don't go to the fight at 9 o'clock after having a nice dinner and a couple of beers with your buddies and sit down. You usually got there at 4 in the afternoon for the fight that didn't happen until 11.
We have time for 2 more questions. There was another one up there. Mean old John Maynard just keeps signaling this. Okay, fast question.
Real
lightning
quick,
round. Yeah.
how many photographers did Sports Illustrated send to a major event in order to get the best shot because you aren't always in the right spot? And what was your rivalry like with those other photographers?
Great question.
Well, I mean, it's a different world then. So, I mean, for example, we'd cover the Super Bowl. We probably sent 4 photographers. Today, they may send 12. But they're competing. Look at how well it's covered on television. And the editor sees these plays on television in slow motion, replays, and he's expecting something as good. We'd send 4 photographers. I mean, I had, I had one competitor, Walter Yost, who had a wonderful show here, who is still one of my closest friends. We had a pretty good bunch of shooters. The competitors, you can't win every week. We were competing often for the cover of the magazine. You can't always be in the right seat. You can't, I always expected, I think Sports Illustrated shooters were pretty good photographers, so you just expected them to score. They were not going to miss. You just didn't want to miss either, and if you were a little luckier than them that day, you did better.
Okay, yes, sir, right here in the middle. If you can pass that by the...
Thank you. What is the shot that touched you most emotionally?
Wow. I have to think about that. Just
Good, you're something. I think the fabled Diane Shaw may have fed him that question. Yeah, so we've got a great writer among others.
well, my next book is, by the way, Sports Illustrated is going to publish a memoir, which Diane is writing. So I'll answer her question. If it was hers. Wow, I just don't know. I haven't really thought about it. I mean, wow.
Say
I don't
you
know.
haven't taken it yet. It's going to be the next one.
I just haven't thought about it. I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, it's a very good question. I'm sorry.
Then we're going to have one last one so that we don't end on stump him, but you win a valuable prize, sir.
And I may think of an answer.
Hi.
It's a good-
I teach journalism, and I was wondering if you had
I'm
any
sorry,
Can you
advice.
can't
speak a
hear you.
little louder?
I teach journalism, and I was wondering if you had any advice for sports photographers that are just starting out.
Well, you know, I look at sports pictures every week. You know, Sports Illustrated now does those spreads. I wouldn't know how to advise a young sports photographer today because they're taking better pictures than we ever took. I mean, a certain amount of it is the equipment, but it's much more than the equipment. The photographers today seem to be just better and better. I mean, every week I look at Sports Illustrated and I say, God, I'm so happy I'm not competing with these guys because they're just very good. I think that the one thing that a sports photographer must do is, and I think Shelby touched on it, is prepare. And that's the single thing that I think, the equipment today is so good that it's awful easy to be lazy. And I think that if I were going to tell somebody how to maybe do a little better, it would be the old-fashioned sense of preparation and knowing the little things. I mean, I really understood where the light was going to be at a particular time, what the background might look like, things that if you pay attention to pay off. I mentioned about caring about whether I put enough room for the logo and the corner flap. They don't teach that in photo school, and I think that if you do that, I have a cover on Time magazine of a non-sports subject, but I did a cover on Pope John Paul when he came to America. It is one of the best magazine covers I ever had published. It's a mediocre photograph when you take away the logo and the billing. Ray Cave came up with the title John Paul Superstar. And when you put the logo and the billing, it was great. And I knew it when I took the picture was going to make a great cover. That they don't teach. So I think that kind of thing, just to think about what your mission is. If your mission is to get the cover of Time magazine, you might take a picture that isn't composed the way a great photograph of that moment would be posed, but is posed just like the glove where I left room for the billing. The things that an art director looks at and says, wow, that's the cover. And a young photographer wants to get the cover of the magazine or the lead spread or whatever, and you have to know those things. And think
Or
about
if it's on a digital platform. I think Neil is putting his finger on something important for students to know. They need to know what audience they want to be shooting for and what medium it will be in. A magazine cover is different than what will now be successful on the iPad and the tablets, which are changing. It's changing Sports Illustrated itself. The app version is somewhat different and very interesting. Lots of extras. I want to thank you all very much for coming and having a chance with the Mozart of sports photography. Coming to the night studio.
Did Mozart play second place for the Pirates? I wasn't too sure.
He played for Chicago. They loved him out there. And we thank also our friends at Nikon for doing a wonderful job in helping present this. Remind you that the book signing and Mr. Leifer himself will be available after it. And good afternoon. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Shelby. Thank you very much.